Hello, welcome to another episode of Critical EDH. I'm Eric. I'm here with
Logan.
and today we're talking about everyone's, what everyone's got their eye on right now in CDH, Hashaton.
Yeah, Hashaton seems poised to be probably the only viable CDH card out of this Fast and the Furious 11 set.
Yeah, like on one hand, he kind of just gets the most attention by default because you either talk about this or the gold foil.
Yeah.
But aside from that, I think even if this were in a more interesting set, if it was like Aether Drift Horizons 2, I think the way Hashaton reads just invites, like Hashaton says, please break me,
Yeah, I think a lot of that stems from the Orzhov casting cost, but also the blue color identity provided by the triggered ability. Mm-hmm. And I think that's super interesting because it's super castable, and the ability is like obscure enough that it seems like there's probably a way to break it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like the ability to have a 3-color commander but only need 2 colored pips. Granted, it's not going to be as free as like Rograg. Literally nothing's as free as Rograg, but I think it does lower the threshold, and it just makes it so easy to kind of build around Hashaton in maybe ways that would be a little bit more difficult if you're in a traditional 3-color pile.
Yeah, and also, how much worse would this card be if it were just black-white? I think it would be pretty bad. So I think just obviously adding the best color in CDH right now, you're adding blue to it. That obviously makes it very attractive.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, exactly what you're talking about, how Hashaton's triggered ability. For those who don't know, the real hotness is that whenever you discard a creature card, the card doesn't have to go to the graveyard. So it lets you skip around like Dothy and Graveyard Hate. All you have to do is discard a creature card, and then you can pay 2 colorless and a blue, and you create a 4/4 copy of it. Period.
Yep.
And so you've got all these cards like Esper Sentinel or Polywall Prodigy. They just really, really want that extra power toughness. So there's just a lot of generic value.
I think that's a good entry point to start at is to create a 4/4 Esper Sentinel or Polywog Prodigy, and then you're like, okay, well, that's pretty much an unpayable tax to pay. So I think at like the entry point, that's a good example of what the deck is trying to do. Obviously, there's way more complicated things that are possible.
Yeah. So like if the floor is like a 4/4 OBM that's unkillable, kind of talk to me about what you expect the ceiling for this deck to be.
Well, I think the deck list that we're going to go over today is based on the ability to instant speed win, not even instant speed. It's more of a split second win, and win on top of a split second ability or spell. And if you're able to do that, then it's inherent protection for your win.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit more about split second, because I think we see it from time to time on cards like Angel's Grace or Legolas's Quick Reflexes. I think it's like a well-known mechanic, but I don't know if it's seen enough in CDH for players to like really be familiar with the way that it warps kind of counterspell battles. Like when you see a spell with split second cast, like kind of what's going through your mind.
I'm just waiting for it to resolve, and if there's like Quick Reflexes, for example, in Glarb, I can tap Glarb and then shoot something, or it's just kind of like that. I have an answer now, or I have something right now, and I'm stepping in and stopping the stack from building on top of whatever I'm casting.
Yeah.
So it's obviously very powerful, but split second cards are typically nerfed because split second itself is very powerful.
Oh, yeah. I guess that's probably why we don't see like a ton of them, because I'm sure there's got to be a lot of cards with them. But
like Trickbind is a good example of this, where it's a powerful effect because it's split second, but it's kind of narrow in the context of what it can do. So you see a lot of decks not playing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think in CDH, we're always trying to balance how you can break parity on things,
right?
But keeping the overall card quality of your deck like really, really high.
I think Angel's Grace is another good example of this. Probably the most prolific split second card that has seen play in CDH and continues to some extent. A lot of decks aren't running it because while it may stop them from losing, it's kind of a bad card when someone's not going for it. It just kind of sits and rots in your hand.
Yeah. It's a very like reactionary card.
Right, and that's not what you want to be doing.
Mm-hmm. Especially not like in an Esper's shell. I think if you start playing reactionary, you're just kind of going to be forced into this table police position, and you're using up all your resources to stop other people winning, which I think it can be some decks are more well suited for like getting in those kind of like grindy fights and just accruing resources over those types of interactions.
Right.
But oftentimes I think in the meta, especially in the flash meta that we're in, you want to save all your interaction for when you go on top of someone else's win.
Well, and the split second is inherently powerful, but the cool thing about Hashaton is that it gives you that extra like step over split second to sort of break parity on it, and at least potentially break parity on it.
Yeah, I think this card is super fascinating. I don't know if right now I'm interested in playing it, but I am super curious about how people are going to be brewing it. You were talking to me that someone, I think one of the more prolific Hashaton brewers right now, Holden Pryo, you kind of know them and you want to take a look at their list today, I think.
Yep. So we've got it here. I'm going to switch over to that. And his list is called Esper Zero Counterplay, a Holden Pryo special. I think his list is really focusing around the interactions with split second and Lion's Eye Diamond effects, where you can, because Lion's Eye Diamond is a mana ability, you can actually, with the split second effect on the stack, you can use that mana ability to discard your hand. And because Hashaton is a triggered ability, that trigger goes on the stack, regardless of whether, like, you're not casting anything. So you can't cast after split second. You can't even activate abilities normally, but triggered abilities do happen. So,
oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I think that like as a CDH player, whenever I see something go on the stack, my first thought is always like, you know, what I'm gonna do? How does this affect my game plan? How do I need to like adjust or how do I need to respond to it? And with split second, kind of like we said, the only response is just to wait and, you know, have your fingers crossed.
just sit there and stare and wait and go, okay, well, am I losing now or, you know, do I live to see another day, I guess?
Gotcha. Well, so I guess that means one thing we want to keep our eye on as we're going through this list is how many cards with split second we see on them.
I think there's probably, my prediction is going to be between 2 and 4 or 2 and 5. I don't think that a lot of the split second cards, like I said, are that powerful. So you kind of only need a handful of those effects where you have something to just respond on top of with your LED or other effects like that. So
yeah, I think that seems like a good number. That I think you can, most decks I think tend to have between 2 or 4 flex slots.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see pilots using those flex slots to lean in on a mechanic that's really, really strong with this specific commander.
Right.
Obviously, the meta for this commander is still super wide open. I am super curious to see how many of those kind of like psychic frog effects we have on here. Man, holy cow! Look at this creature section. This is fascinating.
I mean, the first thing I see off the rip is Consecrated Sphinx, and
Let's go.
if you're a fan of the channel here, you know we're pretty high on that card. So
this card rules.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's gonna bite me in the bullet someday, but I'm adding this card in literally every single deck that I can.
Yeah, it's really good. I think you and I were talking about a list that I may or may not be running today, where it is not a traditionally run card. So we'll see how it works out. But obviously, the Sphinx is really good because it's essentially a double Ursic study, and even better than that, really, because Ursic study doesn't typically trigger on people's draw steps. So you kind of get to break parity on the draws. So.
Yeah.
If you make a 4/4 Sphinx, it's not as good as a 4/6, but who cares?
Yeah. Oh,
a 3 mana Sphinx is better than a 6 mana Sphinx. So.
Yeah. It both pitches to Force of Will and also can't be Force of Willed in this deck.
Yeah.
Oh man, let's see what else there's going on there. There's that is not a card you see every day. You talked earlier about expecting to see a lot of stuff synergizing with Lion's Eye Diamond, and if you're doing that, why not just
run the creature?
One?
Yeah, run the creature version of Lion's Eye Diamond, which is Diamond Lion.
Diamond Lion. I'm gonna have to practice saying that. I do. Okay. Is this one's activated ability also considered a mana ability?
Yes, as far as I know, it's the text is the same. It's just stapled to a creature that unfortunately it would have to have haste or something like that too.
That's rough. I guess that explains why you don't see it more often.
Right.
Let's see what else we're going there. Esper Sentinel. That's an interesting card. Is that one that lets you like Discard or tutor. Let's see.
Yeah, this is a discard outlet. Looks like. So I'm expecting to see a handful of discard outlets, a handful of things that are worth quote reanimating with Hashaton's ability, and Hazel's Brewmaster. Great card.
That's super interesting. I see a couple like Blood Artist effects. Some
Leveler.
Leveler.
Yeah.
Who needs Thassa's Oracle when you have this?
Yeah.
You were telling me the other day, Leveler, I think, seems to be one of those cards that sees more play, kind of like depending on where you are geographically. Because I think you were telling me that the Leveler kind of definitely seems to play. Were you saying it's in like a Japanese Rockside list?
Yeah. So there's this Japanese Rockside list that floats around where they're playing only 2 creatures. They're playing Leveler and Thassa's Oracle, and they're trying to polymorph into one or the other or both. And I'm like, that's kind of cool, and it's doing well in tournaments. So, I mean, who am I to say that it's bad? I mean, the list is just a control list aside from that.
It's super interesting.
Because I'm running, like, I think 7 creatures or something in Rogsai.
Yeah,
and
low.
so if you cut that down to 2, that's like 5 more flex slots.
Yeah.
Probably 3 or 4, which are polymorph effects. So
yeah. Oh, that's
kind of
so
makes
interesting.
sense.
Yeah, because you can like trade DRC and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. No wonder it's really good in this list, especially. I think the comparison to Roxai is apt here because I think it seems to me like both this and Roxai are decks that always want to be going fast, and even if you're building it to be a slightly slower list, literally no one is going to believe you.
Yeah. So in a previous version of this video, which unfortunately the audio got messed up, but I think we were comparing or talking about the versions of Hashaton that could exist, and this is probably the most prolific. Is that our boy?
Oh, let's go. Yeah.
Is it him?
It is. It's him.
All right. Well,
Hey,
we kind of wave him in.
It's straight Tyler. Get in here.
We can't say that.
Oh, it's Jay.
Oh, it's Jay. It's our other boy. Hey, we're recording. You want to say hi?
We're talking about Hashaton. Give us your Hashaton hot take.
Scarier than it looks, I guess.
Scarier than it looks, folks. You heard it here first.
I'd agree with that. I think that's pretty fair.
So, anyway, we were talking about the archetypes for Hashaton and how, because it's pretty wide open with its abilities, you can run the sort of standard Esper good stuff. Mm-hmm. You can run Esper mid-range. You can run Esper turbo. You can run Reanimator. There's all these different things. And I think the split second archetype is even distinct enough where it's different from all of those.
Oh, for sure. I do think it's kind of colloquially amongst like CDH conversations prominent enough that if you're like, oh, I just want to play Esper and this seems like an interesting commander, I'm just going to play kind of generic Esper stuff, no one's ever going to let you resolve your commander, regardless of how much you try to be like, no, I just want like a really big like Esper Sentinel. I thought that'd be silly, goofy, funny.
That seems like a big hill to get over for me, because now if this list is prolific enough that it's doing well and it's powerful enough that it's hard to interact with, then Hashaton just kind of becomes a remove on site commander, and I don't think that's really good for the health of this deck or really the health of like a pod with Hashaton. I think that's something that a lot of CDH players don't really consider is how does like a deck like this warp the pod that you're sitting down with?
Yeah,
because now you have 3 people going, well, if it's uninteractable, I either A, can't let Hashaton resolve, or B, I have to remove it at when they cast LED or they cast the thing that makes it uninteractable.
Absolutely. Like if I'm playing TNK in a pod that has a Hashaton, I like there's nothing more in the world that I want than to be directly after Hashaton, because regardless of what they cast, if this deck performs the way that I think a lot of high level players are predicting it will, it demands a response.
Yes.
Like Kinnan is a super powerful deck and performs really well every single game, but he very rarely gets countered on first cast because they have to develop their board state a little bit. But Hashaton comes out the box a beast.
Kinnan's a bit more predictable as well, because you can see Kinnan and you're like, okay, well, are they representing enough for a Kinnan spin, or are they representing mana for Basalt? Things like that, and like those are all kind of above board interaction points.
Exactly.
Whereas this is a bit more of a black box and kind of unknown.
Like, who knows what's going to happen? Like, even I think once the list kind of iron out a little bit, and we start to see a more like standard like core Hashaton pile.
Do you think that's going to happen? I don't think it will.
I think that the Hashaton, I expect to see like maybe 5 or 6 months from now, a version of Hashaton that is most consistently seen in the top like 16.
Okay.
I think in Esper you're always gonna have a ton of options. And then in the same way that like Kinnan has the opportunity of like how much you want to lean into like big flips, or like Glarb gets to pick how much you want to play off the top. I think Hashaton's gonna have the choice of like how many cards you run in your deck that say discard a card, versus how many just like strong cards do you want, like cards like Razaketh or stuff like that.
So in like CDH, we don't have Rule 0, and that's kind of the whole point of our format.
Yeah.
But I think our version of Rule 0 is sitting down at the table and looking at your opponent's commanders and going, well, if I can't assess what version of this they're running, like it's pretty easy to assess what a blue farm list is. I don't really have to ask questions about it. But I think this is one of those commanders where I almost have to have that CDH Rule 0, where I'm asking, hey, like what version is this? And obviously they don't have to answer, but I think that it does invite that weird sort of conversation that we otherwise normally wouldn't have.
Yeah, I think the most often that conversation is had is sometimes when there's like a Rockside deck, and people sometimes have the conversation of like make sure you're mulliganing for interaction, but I don't think we're really even in a place like that right now in the meta, because Rockside is just not as good as it was pre-bans. But I wouldn't.
I get that conversation a little bit with Glarb, because people go, "Oh, cool, like you're on Doomsday or whatever," and I'm like, "No, I'm not on Doomsday." Yeah. And then it's either Doomsday, or sometimes if they know enough about Glarb, they're like, "Are you on Hulk Reanimator type thing?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not on that either." Then they kind of tilt their head and go, "Well, I don't know what you're doing." But aside from that, like I do think that this is going to happen with Hashaton, because if this strategy is so strong, it's going to invite that conversation of, is this really what I'm up against? And if they don't answer, the answer is probably yes.
Well, maybe that'll help Hashaton players kind of negotiate not getting whatever random ramp they're trying to cast get countered.
Right.
Let's see. Like, so we've talked a lot about the offensive capability of Hashaton.
Yeah, I do want to look at a couple other things here. We have our second consecrated Sphinx in Nezahal.
Oh, heck yeah.
Got OBM. I think a 4/4 Bowmasters is kind of wild. Polywog Prodigy, as we mentioned before. Ranger Captain almost always goes to the yard, so you can actually go. I don't think there's a way that you can double up on the Ranger Captain here. Maybe just with Hazel's Brewmaster you can.
Potentially. Are they on Mockingbird?
They might be on Soul Cauldron too. I'm not sure.
I know they're on Tameshi, which is super cool. That seems like a great way to avoid getting punished for discarding a ton of cards, especially if you're running, worst case scenario, you're almost always going to be able to pull a fish back or something like that.
Yeah, we were up against a Tameshi pilot at Locals last weekend, and super nice guy. I think his name's Hunter.
I know he has really, really funny deck list names. And
Okay.
I'll leave it there.
But yeah, I mean, like Tameshi, I found myself having trouble knowing the interaction points with that, and even like he just like main phased in Intuition and went for Copy Artifact, which I know is part of the line for that. So I was like, okay, well, there's something happening here, but I'm still not like sure when to interact. And I think Hashaton's going to present a lot of those problems for players that don't play it.
Yeah. I think knowing that your deck is such a threat, I wouldn't be surprised if every player memorizes, 1 or 2 win lines. I think often the same way that like a lot of people, even like non-Magna pilots, are pretty familiar with like Clock of Omens lines. So introducing ways that allow you to take the path less traveled, especially with things like Intuition. It gives your deck a flexibility to allow you to kind of like dodge around people's expectations of how the deck is going to be performed. I'm super interested to see if that stays a staple Hashaton card. So one of the things we're talking about is looking for cards that say split second on them. How many of them are we seeing in the sorceries here?
Well, sorceries can't have split second, right?
I guess not. I never thought of that before. That's crazy.
At least I'm like 99% sure that because that's the whole idea is that you cast it on top of like the stack or something. And
that's true. I guess that makes sense. Why would it be on it? Because I guess you want to have split second on like a creature, right?
Yeah. Savin's Wreck. Is that step through?
Yeah.
Holy, we were so deep in it. So we've got Angel's Grace.
Let's see. I'm seeing a lot of familiar cards that I'm used to seeing in Esper. There's that one right underneath the Light and Tutor. That one's new to me.
This one here?
Yeah.
Is that split second as well?
I think so.
Sorry, our screen's a bit small. We gotta
Yep.
Okay.
That's such a cool Fierce Guardianship.
Yeah, mine should be coming in the mail soon.
That's awesome.
Intuition, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So my biggest questions about this are not how you get stuff into hand and then discard them. It's more of I saw Entomb and I saw Intuition, so I'm kind of wondering how those are used to create piles in which help, because Hashaton, I believe, specifies discard. So if you're entombing something, I don't see how that... I guess that part doesn't interact with Hashaton inherently.
Yeah, maybe you're just doing that. We might see when we get down to the enchantments. Maybe they're on like a lot of Reanimator stuff. That is super interesting. I wouldn't expect
is that
to
Windfall?
see those. I think that's a counterspell. I think that's like delay.
No.
Let's see what we're looking at.
Trickbind.
Trickbind.
Oh yeah, the other split second one.
No wonder. There's the Agathos you were talking about.
Yeah, so I kind of figured it would be his Soul Cauldron list because you're putting creatures into the yard and it just seemed good enough.
Is there anything worth entombing so you can Agathos it?
Yeah, Ranger Captain.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Artifacts looking super pretty good.
Yeah, aside from like the fact they can't recognize some of them.
Moonsilver Key.
It just finds LED.
Oh man, dude. This deck wants LED so bad.
Thirsty for LED, that's what he should have named it.
On Necro.
Okay, what's that? What's this enchantment here?
That's a new
Sorry, you're closer to the screen there.
All right, hang on.
I wish I could see on this screen. I can point to it.
Artificer's Intuition?
That one.
That's Artificer's Intuition. I don't know what that is.
Probably
a
tutor, right?
We have to look at the view.
Oh, that's like, isn't that like that's a Tameshi card? I think that's the discard an artifact, tutor for an artifact.
I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure it's what's the green tutor? That's creature.
Survival of the Fittest.
Yeah, that one.
Oh, it's like that for artifacts?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I wonder if Urza plays that card. How many lands are they on?
20 something.
Heck yeah.
I don't know. What's that number? You tell me.
I got 25.
Cool. Yeah,
Makes sense for a turbo list.
especially because you don't need a lot of lands to function. You need a creature in your hand, you need LED, and you need to cast Hashaton. And casting Hashaton's 2 mana. So
Yeah.
how many do you need really?
I guess like 5 mana is kind of what you're really trying to get to because you want to be able to cast Hashaton.
Yeah, but if you find LED, that's 3 mana, right?
That's true. Oh, it looks like Jason's here. Everyone's getting in here.
Hell yeah.
Oh, nope, that's a mailman.
Oh, sick.
A mailman.
Can you sign for that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I'm just gonna monologue while you're doing
Yeah,
that.
we just made eye contact.
I got some hot
I'm gonna ask you.
Japanese card in the mail. Overnight cards from Japan. That's me. I'm right here. Thank you. So yeah, I think Hashaton is poised to be very strong. How consistent it is going to be my main concern. Hey Jay. Ladies and gentlemen, we got the goods.
Yeah, the goods.
So yeah, I was just saying to myself and no one else that I think my concern is how consistent is Hashaton really. That's kind of my main. Like, it seems very powerful, but can it consistently present does it have the tools it needs to consistently go off and do what it needs to do?
Yeah. So like now that we've looked at the deck list, maybe just put the generic Hashaton picture back because
Generic. Disrespecting him already.
disrespect. Because it's such a great question of like how consistent is it going to be? Because that's what I think CH discovered about Stella Lee. That's a pretty apt comparison. But go on. So much potential. It can go so fast, but you got to be so damn lucky. Like,
I think we both have some particular thoughts on Stella Lee as a deck. Luckily, Hashaton's backed up by a better shell in Esper than Is It. I don't even know, like, what is an Is It shell. I don't really think there is one. It's like Breach, Brain Freeze, and cool, you have the minimum cards to do Breach, Brain Freeze, and LED. But, like, can you tutor for it? I don't really think you can. So
I think Is It is one of those colors that kind of suffers from an identity crisis of most things that you'd want to be doing on an Is It shell. You can typically do better
in Grixis or in Jeskai, or you need that sort of tutor package or protection package or draw package.
With the exception of, I mean, you've got some unique standouts like Niv Mizzet, but he's incredibly hard to cast. You've got Krakashima, but that deck is, I mean, it's
broken in a lot of ways, but it still relies on a lot of very specific cards to that deck. Whereas it seems like Hashaton does have that specificity for the individual cards, but is overall backed up by a pretty solid Esper package.
In a way that doesn't require you to step out of traditional CDH packages too much.
Oh my god.
Here we go. This is What's up, Jason?
We're recording. You want to say
Talking
hi?
about Hashaton. Hang on. We've already got Jay's Hashaton hot take. We got to get yours.
No. You got to say it into the mic.
For all the critical EDH fans out there.
I think Hashaton's going to be a above average deck, but it's not going to be S tier.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I think that's what, 4 of us that are on kind of the same page.
we need to, maybe we should have brought in like a Hashaton like enjoyer or someone who's like,
you got a little something on there.
Holy cow.
So I mean Comedian did well at SCG Con Portland, I think, with Hashaton. I think he made top 4. And that's super awesome to see. Congrats to him.
Yeah, good to
but you can hand Comedian a ham sandwich, and I'm sure he can combo with it, right? Like, he's a good player.
Yeah, really, really good. I'm excited to see once this kind of like hits the masses, how it does, because I think a lot of the tournament grinders that we know, I don't know if I know anyone, at least in the Denver scene, who's planning on like kind of picking it up. I expect to see some interest in testing it, but I haven't really, outside of people kind of testing it just for the sake of the hype around the card, I haven't heard, like Freedom Waffle be like, I'm only playing Hashaton now.
Yeah, I don't know that it's going to see that level of adoption. I think the boutique brewers such as Holden, I mean, he's a madman. He's like the mad scientist, and so I respect him a lot in that regard, and I think that he can definitely put together a list and pull off wins with it. I don't know if your average CDH player is going to be able to, or even like have the interest in doing that.
Yeah, I think something we were talking about is how we see this deck. We talked about it a little bit in this video, but something we wanted to talk about is how we see this deck affecting the CDH meta overall.
Yes.
And I think something that I find a lot of players trying to gravitate towards is in this world where everyone has a Rhystic Study or Smothering Tide, or if you're in Denver, a Consecrated Sphinx, trying to find decks that are increasingly hard to punt on because the amount of variables and triggers that you have to keep count of is just so high.
Yeah.
I think in the last week I've missed, like this is going to sound like an exaggeration, but like I legitimately think I've missed almost like 20 Lotho triggers.
Yeah.
Just because
there's just so much
there's so much to keep track
going
of.
on. Well, do you think this deck will perform better in Swiss or in like Top Cut?
I think this deck probably will do better in Swiss.
Yeah.
I think this deck is going to do really well in games where people think they're ready for it and they just aren't.
Yep.
But
I think this deck will get you out of Swiss, and then I think you might
sure.
struggle into untimed rounds because it just seems like when you're sitting down at the top 16 of a 60-plus player event, you're sitting down with killers. You're not sitting down with like people that bring, I don't know, Sithis or like like stuff that's like technically powerful, but is it really is it going to have answers for this?
Yeah, like Hashaton probably takes like Roxanne for a wild ride,
right?
But what does it do against like TNK, Kinnan, and Glarb, like all in the same pod?
Yeah.
Against people, and once again, once
well, then you have those 3 like decks that can shift to that control angle, and now you have all the tension on you. And can you sufficiently like defend against that?
Especially at like if you cast a leveler at like the wrong time, you can't come back from that.
And like Fairy Mastermind sees so much play right now. Is someone just going to pay and make you draw a card with the leveler? You know?
Oh man, which is I think.
I suppose you can if you're doing the split second leveler plus Thoracle thing, but still, there's at some point you're going to have some struggles.
Something's going to happen there. It on one hand possesses the capacity to just be in a league of its own, but also I think it operates on a unique enough axis that you run the risk of making really, really small decisions that just leave you in the dust. For the rest of the game.
You had brought up the point about how this is going to affect the rest of the pod, the rest of the meta. I want to take a step back and recall to before the bans and when Nadu was introduced, because I think there's a lot of interesting comparisons that can be made there, where Nadu was introduced and people weren't ready for it, and it ran away with the tournament scene for a while. And I think the answer was start running things like Blasphemous Act, Toxic Deluge, probably not Fire Covenant because that like that targets, but we're seeing these like generic board wipes, maybe like Supreme Verdict and things like that, where it's like, this is my problem solver. I'm just going to wipe the board. Like Nadu is not going to have anything, and then we're like, okay, business as usual. I think that with this, we might see more of an uptick of Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, Strict Serenade, especially. Because Strict Serenade is such a low impact card, and Strict Serenade is kind of like a silver bullet against this deck because it counters creatures and it counters artifacts. And if you can counter that LED, that kind of helps a lot.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Something I'm learning about myself, that one of the ways I need to grow as a deck builder is I feel like I tend to build really, really greedy decks. I think it was on Wednesday I was lending our local Yurko player my TNK list, and I said,
Shout out to Steven.
Shout out to Steven. We gotta get you on here someday. I think I literally told him I don't run any single target removal because someone else always has it. which I think does great in Swiss. Does great in Swiss. But I
know like Kinnon's already running Pongify and like Rapid Hybridization and Psych Rift and Chain of Vapor, all those things. So do you think that like this deck, I mean, just to me on the face of it, it seems really vulnerable to those effects. Do you think that's kind of true?
Yeah, I think especially what you talked about. I think this is a dangerous time in CDH to be a new deck. I think a lot of the really strong runners in the scene right now have been around for long enough that like pilots have had time to get used to the list, players have had time to get used to it. So even the things that are really, really scary, they're not going to like really catch people by surprise. No one's gonna be like, TNK is on Adnaz, what? But I think that this deck, just based off of its newness, is going to generate some recency bias. So I think that in combination with this is a good time to start adding creature hate, especially I think with the proliferance of like TNT.
Well, I think this is going to have a knock-on effect of making things like Hazel's Brewmaster worse. Because if there's more single target answers, then Brewmaster inherently becomes bad. Not bad, but like I mean, if you have a Grand Abolisher or something protecting it, obviously you just win. But if you're seeing more Swords to Plowshares, more Pongify and that sort of thing, or even Strict Serenade, those creature effects become worse. Yeah, it's like a tragedy of the commons type thing of if decks are all simultaneously trying to move into this space of doing things like on a stick, using creatures as opposed to spells, then all the more typical decks have to do is swap out a Dispel for a Path, you know? CDH is so cool because we have these cards that are introduced and they have these super minor effects, or you see a new commander like this and it's powerful, but then really what's not interesting to me about it is the commander itself. It's how is the meta going to shift afterwards? What sort of changes are we going to see? And I think the meta would probably shift on its own, even if, let's say, they stop printing Magic cards. We would still be evolving, and there's so much complexity and stuff that it really wouldn't stop. But the fact that we get a new commander every month or 2 months or whatever, it's really just pushing us to. I think as grinders and people who want to play with the best of the best, we have to recognize that, and we have to shift. We have to change.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, and I do really agree with you. I would be interested in hearing if anyone else disagrees, but I think people's personalities and play styles has such a strong impact on the way that pods perform or that decks perform that even if we never got any new cards ever again, I think there still would be this kind of like rotation. You know, maybe you'd still see 10, 15 decks that you're always kind of seeing those same-ish ones. But within that, there would still be this rotating hierarchy. I mean, I think we've even seen that. I know some people like to talk about or have the opinion that like CDH has like a really stale meta right now. But I think the fact that like I don't think there was a single Roxai at Snowy Summit.
There were 0 Roxais.
And that was a deck that mere months ago people were saying was going to like basically kill the format because there were no answers for it.
Yep.
But then instead of some new commander being released that was just, like absolutely able to like take a dunk on rocks without even trying, the meta just slowly shifted
and just pushed it out.
Yeah.
So
there's not room for it anymore.
So let's close up the video here, and I do want to ask sort of like one more question. We saw at Snowy Summit TNT being so popular, but it having like a really horrific conversion rate. I think we had 19 entries or something like that, and I think only 1 or 2 lists converted.
I think so. I know we were against one of them in the top 16. I think there was another one in the pod behind us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I faced him in top 4. So with that being the case, where do you think Hashaton stands? Do you think it's going to have, I mean, what are your opinions on its conversion rate, on its ability to just close out games and stuff like that?
That is a really thought-provoking question. I think I'm expecting at the next 2 or 3 tournaments to see a lot of Hashaton. My initial expectation.
So popularity high.
I think popularity is going to be really high. Okay. Do I think it's going to break into like the big 3? Like a month from now.
What are your big 3?
Like I think TNK, Kinnan, and I think that kind of depends on the pilot. And then kind of like this rotating third of either like Roxai, TNT, or I don't know. Like I think Hashaton has the potential to be, at least for a month or so, good enough to hang in that spot. But I don't know if just being interesting and just being an Esper is enough to let you like hang with the big boys in top 4 for like, more than a hot minute. I mean, what about you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
I think that there's only my big 3 are TNK and Kinnan, and then like you said, kind of the secret third option, which could change by, how much I ate for breakfast or what the temperature is outside, and like who knows. But
yeah, like at Snowy Summit, we saw so many glarbs.
It was 7. It's not like a ton. It's a good amount.
I think if there's 7 times more glarbs than there were Roxais, I think that's a lot.
Well, 7 times 0 is like still 0. So.
Oh no.
Yeah, I mean, I get your like. I think we're both on the same page where there's 2 defining decks of the format right now. I think TNT is not as good as people think it is. It's kind of a bit of a cope with the meta, and the deck is super accessible, but it kind of struggles to get there sometimes.
Yeah, I think it definitely seems to be suffering from the same quote unquote like problem that Kinnan had roughly a year ago, where it's so accessible and it's so like it kind of like is a deck that's in vogue right now that just so many people are picking it up.
My current outlook on Hashaton specifically though is I think it's sort of in the B+ to A- range, and I think the closer you get to a strong Esper shell the closer it gets to an A minus, because the commander is just fine. If
Yeah.
you replaced Tivit with Hashaton and like nothing else, I think it would be functional.
Yeah.
And people aren't casting Tivit, so like I guess you can cast Tivit and you can do the whole win thing with that, but like a lot of times you don't. Like a lot of times you're just
Yeah.
playing control and you're just
Yeah.
finding Thoracle and you have a protected Thoracle. And like I think that this deck has the ability to do that with also turning on the fact that you can play Deadly Rollick and Fierce Guardianship where Tivit probably can't.
Yeah, I think I agree with your assumption that I think on average this deck is going to shake out in the A minus tier.
Yeah, and that's like plenty good enough. Like that's
super
yeah,
good.
that's yeah.
I mean, once again, I'm not a pilot of any of these decks, but I'd put Sisay in that category. I'd put Magda in that category. I think Hashaton has the potential for there always to be at least one of them at every CDH event.
Yep.
And I think that is something that most legendary creatures in Magic don't get to say about themselves.
For sure. But I think that's going to wrap up the video for us. And
Yeah.
hopefully this gave you some insight into sort of our thought process and how we analyze commanders. We're not always just looking at like the deck list and going through every single card and combing over what it's doing. We're kind of looking at it more holistically and saying, how is this going to affect what the decks that I play? Because whether I see myself playing it or not, who knows in the future.
Yeah.
But right now, like I've got the decks that I'm playing and going, well, how do I address this problem? What do I do if I come up against it? That sort of thing.
Yeah. One thing I think I've learned from you is the value of, even if you have one or two decks that you're like piloting. In fact, I think everyone should really try to focus on one or two. There is tons of value in either just playing or picking up or having a rock solid conversation with a Hashaton pilot just to figure out what the heck is going on that side of the table.
And I think that's a good goal for us as a channel is to get Holden Pryo on and talk to him about the list and where he feels it is and kind of ask him those hard questions about like, we play these decks and like feel like we can handle it in this way. How do you think that this deck stands up to those answers and sort of thing?
Yeah, like we can say how we feel going against Hashaton, but how does a Hashaton player feel going against us?
Right.
Yeah, would love to have that conversation. Holden Pryo, if you're available, you know where to find us.
123 Consecrated Sphinx Drive, Denver, Colorado.
Send us a letter. We'll pick it up mid-episode.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for us.
Yeah. Thank you guys for watching.
And we'll see you next time. We got another video coming out here shortly. So
yeah. See you guys
See you
around.
then.